Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we're going to talk about a novel. The title of this novel is Wawona Hotel. The author is Matthew McKay. The publisher from Albany, California, across the bay, is the Boaz Publishing Company. Thank you for stopping by.
It's a pleasure.
I hesitated there. I didn't know whether I should call you doctor.
Matt is just fine.
Okay, because, you know, this gentleman's background is, it says here, respected psychologist. Thank God you're respected. We wouldn't have you on a program. And for 25 years, you were the clinical director of the Haight-Ashbury Psychological Services in San Francisco, and currently a professor at something called the Wright Institute in Berkeley. And it says that you published more than 20 research-based self-help titles, including Self-Esteem, Thoughts and Feelings, Prisoners of Belief, and Messages. His poetry, imagine this, after all that, his poetry has appeared in 2 volumes, Lucifer in the Rest Home. Oh, I love poetry titles. Lucifer in the Rest Home. Only you could have come up with that. I don't think the publisher would. And Yosemite Poems, and more than 60 literary magazines. But Wawona Hotel is your first novel. What's been holding you back?
Well, I've been busy writing self-help books, but I've always loved fiction, and I love telling stories, and I love the potential that fiction has to elucidate and make clearer some very interesting psychological ishes. And
it's as though it seems to me often where you could work for an hour and a half, and then to get something across, and then your character could do it just like that.
Exactly, it's more efficient in some way, and it if I could say it sort of teaches lessons in a way that nonfiction can't. You hammer people over the head with things in nonfiction, but in fiction, you slide it in.
There it is. Yeah. There it is. Well, one of the things that you slide in here is what I guess or from the psychological standpoint, you would call a condition called empathic awareness. And you introduce it a couple of different ways. The book opens with this passage: there are certain occurrences in life that confound reason, that stand beyond all explanation. Yet we try to explain them away. We tell the story over and over, hoping a listener's chance remark might somehow make sense of the absurd. And that's saying what you were just saying in a different way, that we can get at something that we can't get at, quote, scientifically by telling a story.
Exactly right.
And that's what the narrator here decides to do, to tell us this unusual story, which involves this state called empathic awareness. Now, at another place at the very end of the novel, you say something more about this condition. While Danielle, one of the main characters, lay unconscious, bleeding amid the glitter of broken glass, while Annie, her daughter, ran across the fairway to take refuge in the woods, a life ended, and another one began. In this other life, Danielle was given sight and knowledge, a gift so powerful that it blew everything apart. And that in itself, the phrase blew everything apart, is to say that's what the novel is about. And at the same time, it says that this is a mixed gift. It's a gift which we might call a two-edged sword.
That's right. As a result of this auto accident, Danielle, after a coma of 3 weeks, wakes up with surprising new awareness. She is able to read people's feelings, read their intentions, and even to some extent the thoughts and imagery that goes on. So she's become a profound empath. She's connected to other people in a way that we hardly ever experience. It's almost as if her skin dissolves and she can blend or join.
She uses that phrase in the book. It's though I've dissolved and I'm there. The other thing about it, I think, if I read it correctly, is that she has no power over it, over whether she does it or she doesn't do it.
She's always on. She's always aware. And that awareness, as she discovers, begins to change her relationships. Her relationship to her husband, for example, a man who's sort of a fabricated, made-up man who has a persona that he's invented to win her love. She begins to see through that persona, that facade. She can see that he has some cruelty, some sexual peculiarities that begin to horrify her, really.
The great thing, though, about Wawona Hotel is that these experiences are not discussed, but they're lived by real characters, some of whom we're going to meet in a moment.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Hotel Wawona, that's the title. It's a very unusual novel, and in its own way, it's very fast-paced, although there's not a lot of explosions and killings and stuff like that. But it is very fast-paced. The fast-paced author, Matthew McKay, he's done everything. He's a psychologist. He's written lots of textbooks and self-help books, and he even writes poetry. His book is published by Boaz Publishing Company over there in Albany, California. You know, not just the characters in this book are very much alive. I would say that the place where the Wawona Hotel is located, that's very much alive in this book. You talk about it, I think, with great love. What are we talking about? What part of California are we talking about?
It's in Yosemite. It's just south of the valley, and it's a very, very special place to me. I first went there in 1956, and with my family, and I fell in love with it. Then I began to recognize, well, this is really where I belong. This is, in some way, felt like more home than home. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I've over the years, I've spent an enormous amount of time in Yosemite and Wawona. I used to live in Yosemite, worked for the Curry Company, and when this novel takes place in 69.
69, yeah.
Just shortly before that, I had been living there for a while and working there. So so it's a place that I can imagine myself at any spot in that area, and I can, in my mind, turn 360 and see everything that's there. So,
that really comes across. I mean, your description of the scenes in the woods and and on the grounds of the Wawona Hotel are just very, very specific and very, very endearing, I think. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you've been there,
yeah,
and more than been there. You've swallowed it whole. I think
I've absorbed it and taken it in, and been nurtured by it too. It's just a very beautiful place.
You know, I think maybe the way to go now is to talk about the person who I think is most affected by this power of empathetic awareness. Not Danielle, I want to say James, the husband.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happens when she comes out of the coma and she has this power, the first thing that she gets very certain about in a negative way is her husband. And yet when she talks about their backstory, when he first came on the scene with her, he liberated her. This is weird. This is hard.
Yeah. They've had what seems to her a basically good relationship, but suddenly he is transparent, and she can see qualities in him, some of his cruelty, his selfishness, that are very disturbing and new. She can see through the facade that he's created throughout their whole life together. And as she begins to see through him, he experiences this profound sense of shame. He's exposed, and not only is he exposed, but what I really wanted to look at is what happens to someone who is completely seen, completely known, and yet unacceptable, rejected. To be transparent and so somebody can stare into you like they're looking through glass and yet find you unacceptable. What does that do to you? And for James, it blows him apart. He's
well, and it ultimately does something totally horrible to him. Now, having this quote talent unquote is Danielle, whom I fell in love with right from the start, and yet as the novel goes on, I start to have questions about her.
Well, she's a lovely human being who has a gift that is bigger than she knows what to do with or how to make sense of it. And whereas the relationship with James begins to very quickly unravel because of his shame and his and the pain he's in because he can be seen, she begins to form a relationship with another man, at first just a friendship, who grows up in a world where he feels like a ghost. He's never really been seen. It's a dry, emotionally dusty environment that he grows up in. And for him to be seen, to be known, is actually manna from heaven. He experiences her sight as something that's really a great gift to him. And so it's a very different outcome as their relationship begins to develop. It's a love relationship that really changes both of them.
Very, very negative for one, very, very positive for the other. And then there's somebody somewhat caught in the middle, the child, Annie.
Yeah.
She's somehow involved in this knowledge. There's a place where Danielle feels that it's helping her relationship with Annie because she can anticipate what will make her happy.
Yeah, she sees what's really going on with Annie, and she can make decisions, better parenting decisions, because she really can read her child.
But what if the lonely young man Harper that we were just talking about, who rescued Danielle by the side of the road, what of him? Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. Wawona Hotel, which is a novel, is our book today. Matthew McKay is joining us. And one of the things that struck me about this book, and we haven't talked about it yet, one of its literary aspects, if you will, is the poetry. Is this the poet sneaking stuff in here on us? The poet Matthew McKay.
Well, it's true. I'm sneaking things in, and many of the poems were written long before the book itself ever even began to take form. The genesis of the book, really, aside from the interest in what it means to have absolute openness and authenticity in relationships, is an event that happened about 15 years ago in San Francisco. I'm not going to say what it was, but it was an event that was so unsettling to me and so disturbing to me, and it involves a child, and my own daughter was exactly the same age as the child in the book when this event happened. Mm-hmm. And I was consumed with the question of how that could have happened. I actually wrote a poem about it at the time that it was later published and actually appears in the book. And the book actually, for me, became an effort to provide a backstory or to explain how such a thing could have happened. And so that's what sort of drove the book. Mm-hmm. Years after the event happened, I was still trying to process and figure it out.
Okay. Now, one of the poems in here comes at a time when Danielle and Harper are kind of at the edge of being in love. And I'd just like to read a bit of it, if I may. These poems have no title, so I can't say this is the poem called. It doesn't have a title. Here then is love entering the disused garden, the arranged familiar wicker chairs. It doesn't change. I come in expecting death and am afraid. I come in mute or talking just to talk. The shadows stretch across me in the chair, cool and lengthening. It doesn't change, and this is the only place I can enter love. Now, he reads that our friend Harper reads that one to Danielle, and she gets it, particularly that line, "It doesn't change, and this is the only place I can enter love."
And when she hears the poem, she also realizes the depth and power of Harper's hunger, his yearning. And she's already sensed it because, of course, she has this empathic awareness. But as she begins to get just how strong the feeling is in Harper, she becomes afraid. And she begins to back off a little bit and withdraw at that point in the book. Other events
propel
them forward together. But that poem, its openness is disturbing to her.
Harper is, I think, a very different kind of young male character, in the sense that he respects her in that old-fashioned way that we used to use that term, that a man should have a respect for a woman or women in general, and he doesn't push and he doesn't force himself in any way.
Yeah, and in fact, he worries about somehow invading her or pushing past some line or limit that would be appropriate. In fact, when she was injured in the auto accident, he accompanies her in the ambulance, and they cut open her shirt. She's unconscious to put on sensory apparatus, and he has to turn away. He doesn't want to see her in her vulnerability. Fear this feels like a violation.
That's a wonderful old-fashioned response, I thought, when I read that. And I guess probably because of my age, I liked him for that. I really, really did. Oh, dear. Empathetic awareness of power. It has some results that you really don't want. Early on, Danielle says of it, that her husband's words were disconnected from his actions. That's what she saw. Yeah. And she never thought that before she had that power.
She could never really sense what was going on beneath that facade, that picture that he so carefully crafted and created for her. And when she began to see underneath, she recognized that there was a part of him that when she woke up was disturbed.
No.
And of course, she would later find out that there was a reason for that because he'd gotten involved with someone else while she was in a coma. And so all of these events, she sensed but couldn't make sense of in the beginning.
Reviewers may make a mistake with this novel, so I'm going to warn you off it right away. They may say to you that this is a small novel, that its compass is very narrow. And I tell you, it is not a small novel. It is a very focused novel, but it goes very, very deep into the human condition, into the nature of love, into the dangers of knowledge. It's called Wawona Hotel, the author Matthew McKay. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.